Hi, I'm really glad to meet both of you. And I read both these books, yours and hers, and they struck me as I mean, there were similarities, thematic similarities, which I didn't expect, but I don't know why I didn't expect them. But but what really interested, I know the subject is social construct and freedom and all that. But let's start with how both your books use allegory and use myth in very specific ways. You know, do you want to start? Helga?
Yeah, sure. I I grew up in the rural Norway where the myths and the tales that you're referring to were a big part of my upbringing, and the educational system where we learn these myths as sort of a part of our culture in the rural Norway. So I've been always been told these myths and tales, but I've never contemplated what they were about. And I was struck by the fact when I was about to write Reverberation or Toxic, as it's called in English, the fact that they were mostly about rebellious women and told by men, but in generations told by men about women that were rebellious and sort of disobedient, and how they were punished by the same men. So that was struck me when and as a child I never thought about it, but when I read them as an adult and did some research about them, I was struck by that fact. So that's why I chose to use them in Toxic as sort of a backdrop for the modern tale about Matilda, that is a rebellious and provocative female character without even recognizing herself that she is just that.
But the general idea in India at least is that the Scandinavian countries are like paradise for women. So I was a little surprised that the same kind of misogyny in the myths exists even in Norway. That's really surprising.
Yeah, and I think we like to think in Scandinavia that it doesn't exist misogyny, or that it's sort of old-fashioned. But of course, it does exist in every structure and culture that's been there for generations. Even though we are very equal in Scandinavia, and we like to consider ourselves as equal, there are still, I think, inherited views, like in the myths, that still exists in parts of the culture at least.
Okay, and Sophie, the whole book is very, when you read it, one reads it as an allegory of how men and women are. So could you talk about that?
Yeah, but I also like I think there is a mythological influence too on Cursed Bread, as well as allegorical. I'm also I'm from a small place as well, a small town in Wales, and I grew up speaking Welsh. Like Welsh myth was a massive element of like my kind of day-to-day cultural life, and I think I was really struck with Cursed Bread, how Welsh myths are often about transformation and trickery and things being revealed to like not be what they are, and that's something I really wanted in Cursed Bread. That sense of the magic is gone. You've woken up and you're in a hut made of sticks, for example, when you thought you were in like a fairy bower, or 50 years has passed and you thought you just went to sleep for one night, or your child has been changed into like a fairy child. So that idea of you feel like you have a grip on reality, but it's so easily changed, it's so easily transformed overnight, and that was something that I just find so intriguing. It was always intriguing in mythologies, thinking about like the kind of cultural aspects, isn't it? And yeah, I guess the allegory as well, the kind of this toxic relationship, the way that the baker's wife is with her husband as well, that kind of sense of, it felt like almost a fairy tale relationship, this kind of, but in a bad way, where she's longing, but it's almost like he's more interested in the bread. She kind of she wishes she was almost the bread, that sense of there being this barrier between them. Yeah.
And also, since it's I mean, there's also this feeling of, I don't know, poisonous outside world, and and these girls are there, and so there's this sense of danger. I mean, in both these books, there were points when I had to put the book down when I was reading it and kind of catch my breath, because the psychological fear that both these books actually, that's the one thing that I found that was really common, is very real. So do you guys want to talk about that? How you built up to that?
Yeah, I guess in terms of poisonous, well, the water cure in the water cure or coast
In the water cure.
Okay, sorry, I was talking about coast spread. Wrong novel. Yeah, in the water cure, yeah, that sense of them being a family, which is so. They're raised apart from the rest of the world, and they're told so many lies, and they have to undergo so many rituals in order to stay safe in this world. Building up those physical rituals, I think, was a really important element of creating that kind of atmosphere, creating that sense of a toxic outside world that they had to be protected from at all costs. Thinking about how, I guess, like how much we pay for safety, and when does the price of safety become too much? Like when does it start impacting upon a person?
Yeah, we'll take it from what she said, about toxicity, and how in her novel, in The Water Cure, the toxicity, at first you think it's outside, but then you realize, I mean, I don't want to give away anything, but it's within, and it's within families and within the community. And we see the same thing in your novel, I mean, as you go forward, first the village is very idyllic, and you think, village life, mountains, beautiful, all that. And then slowly you realize they're all nuts,
Yeah, they are really nuts, as all of us are, of course. No, but I think as in every place and in every human, there are complex characters I try to depict, and nobody is just either good or bad, nor is the small communities. But I do find it interesting that, as I am from a small community myself, the sort of dynamics that appears in small societies where everybody knows everybody, and they know each other families in generations, and they know the secrets and the feuds that's been there for a long, long time, and still today they are fighting over property, or somebody slept with somebody's wife 100 years ago, and it's like, so I think the dynamics in small places are interesting, because you are sort of doomed to relate to. When I grew up in my school, we were 6 in my class, so we were 3 girls and 3 boys, and you are sort of, you have to make it work with the people that you are put together with in those frames. And I think that is both very productive in many ways. It's making you more maybe feel like a community or a small society. And it's also toxic in some ways, because there are no way to run, nowhere to hide, and the repercussions are very strong within those small societies with very strong codes, you could say.
And then when an outsider, I mean, in your story, outsider who's a woman, and in yours, 3 men land up on this place, in this secluded space. So the effect of the outsider, do you want to talk about that?
The effect of the outsider?
Yeah.
It's related to what I just said, because Matilda, in my novel, she comes to this small countryside, and as you said, she has this vision of a very romantic place with the mountains and the nature and sort of the traditions that she sees as something very real and authentic, which is a word she uses a lot. And she is made fun of because she uses the word authentic, when for the people who live there, it's just the way it is, you know. But she doesn't understand the codes that's been there for centuries. And actually in Norway we have a word or a sort of a term for that called the small town animal or the small town monster, which sort of tries to capture the atmosphere that an outsider will face if you sort of break the rules that you don't know that exists. And you will be judged and you will be punished, but you won't know it's happening. You will just feel it, sort of like the atmosphere is changing, and you know you're doing something wrong, but you don't know what it is. And that is what Mathilde is experiencing as an outsider. She comes there and she doesn't understand the rules, and she's breaking them without even knowing that she does so.
And Sophie, you know, talk about the two men who come on, you know, in the water cure, the two men and the boy who land up on the shore, you know, and the effect that they have. It's on what has become, you know, a small community of 3 females, you know, young women, and their mother. So it's at that point a completely female place. So,
Yeah, I think so. Hello? Oh, sorry. In the water cure, there's 3 sisters, Leah, Grace, and Sky, and they live on a kind of very isolated island community. And so when the men wash up the outsiders, they're the only men they've ever seen in their life apart from their father. And they've been told their whole life that, you know, men are terrifying and are toxic and bring this kind of toxicity with them. So it's not even just kind of a matter of there is curiosity, but it's also a matter of terror. They're kind of, you know, being confronted with people they've been told, you know, deadly to them, and, you know, even just being around them might make them sick. And so I think there is that really primal fear, but at the same time, there is that curiosity, and there's also, you know, desire for the first time as well for the middle sister Leah, and it's a potent mix, I think, and it goes on to have potent consequences. But I was just trying to think of, you know, how strange would it be if just, you know, your whole life was so small and you've been told so many things that you'd really taken as truth, and all it takes is that one breach to really start questioning what is true at all, and to also to think that, you know, that kind of breach feels so different to what you would have imagined.
but this distrust of men and the consequences, you know, of getting too close to them, you know, it's an idea that a lot of women, at least I don't know, in India, you grow up with it, you know, you're always warned. So is that the same thing? So that struck me when I was reading The Water Cure, you know. So but I mean, I'm assuming in more liberal societies that doesn't exist, or does it?
No, I mean, it's kind of it's more of like a thought experiment, you know, kind of pushed to the kind of the like kind of pushed to a more like literal way. So I'm not saying at all like don't get close to men, but I think that idea of, you know, actually what if men were like so dangerous in that way, or in the novel, like, you know, there is an illness being passed around which is kind of being transmitted by men, and there's an epidemic of, it's kind of like an epidemic of illness as well as male violence, and it's quite a mysterious, I guess, a mysterious sickness that we're not, as readers, completely sure about how serious it is and how truthful the parents are being about the extent of this toxicity, and that's kind of part of the ambiguity of the novel as well, because, you know, as readers we're actually being, well, are men dangerous? Are they as dangerous as the sisters have been told? Or is this just another lie that is being perpetuated against them to kind of keep them in their place? So it's kind of, there's such a lot of ambiguity in that about what's true and what's actually being told.
Okay, now that you've brought up, you know, the epidemic, and so let's, you know, that's another thing. Both the, you know, sort of both the works kind of refer to this great, the pandemic that we've been through, and the silence of it, and the danger of it, and the fear and the paranoia, So talk about that.
The pandemic?
Yeah, which appears in your novel. I mean,
Yeah.
Helga leaves. Sorry, in
Matilda. Yeah. Whoa, dangerous. It's okay. No, it's a lot of similarities between Matilda and me actually, but not so much. No, it's very big differences as well. Yeah. No, but the pandemic was sort of a starting point for the idea behind the novel, because I was. As I said, I grew up in the countryside, in the rural parts of Norway, and it's always sort of been viewed as more less modern. It was not so cool to be from the countryside in Norway when I grew up. So I always wanted to be in the city. I always wanted to be more urban, and I think very many people in the Norwegian countryside feel that way. But then there was a shift in the values, even before the pandemic. It was sort of, and I think it has to do with the climate, and you can't live the way you have lived before. So the values change, and the more rural values become sort of higher, and people wanted to live a slower life. They wanted to grow their own vegetables. They wanted to sort of be a part of the more authentic way of living that they pictured. And I have lived both in the rural parts and in the urban parts of Norway, and I find it very interesting how that trend is shifting. And so I wanted to write about Matilda. That is, during the pandemic, a lot of people left the cities in Norway to go live in a small sort of farm in the countryside in Norway. And that was interesting to me, how they suddenly realized that that was the kind of life they wanted when they never before wanted it. And Matilda, and my theory is that Matilda is running away from something rather than seeking what's there. She's running away from herself, from her longings, from her failures, and from her family as well. And she sort of projects this onto it's about the pandemic, it's about the countryside, or the values, or anything. So I think the pandemic for me was sort of the starting point, and then it became less important in the novel as in itself, but it was an important starting point.
What about you, Sophie?
Well, I think the VAKKU was written before the pandemic, but it's funny after, because people were kind of talking to me about it and being like, it's so strange in your book you have this, this toxicity, this virus, this sickness, which is spreading, which is causing like a lot of fear, and also in the book they have many rituals to keep themselves safe from the outside world, many of which involve kind of breathing through muslin, so a kind of mask. So it was sort of spooky to look back on, really. And I know during the pandemic, I actually wrote Cursed Bread. I started it in like January 2020, and I pretty much wrote it in lockdown, and it was so much faster than any other book I'd written, not because I think that it was a productive time for me, but I think it was kind of like a life raft for me at the time. And it's funny, like kind of reading back to it and thinking about things like, it's quite like a book of longing and of intimacy, but no one touches. There's kind of no touch happening, and it feels so claustrophobic. It's funny thinking about the indirect impact as well of like the pandemic on a novel, of kind of toxicity of the world coming to the VAKKU via, I guess, the political and social environment of the time, and then the pandemic kind of feeding in as well. It's like you can't really escape, I think, as novelists, what's happening in the world. Like indirectly or directly, your book becomes a product of that time.
And I do think we are still too close to the pandemic. I think we will see a lot of writers in the years ahead writing about it, the consequences, and also the political, the cultural, and the social, the non-touching, what that affects the youth generation. We have somewhat of a discussion on it in Norway, but far too little in comparison to how total it was and how affecting it was for the young students and everybody. So I think we will see a lot of writers in sort of a distance, looking back, reflecting on it more than we have seen now.
I was really struck actually reading your novel how I felt like it was one of the first novels I'd read where it was actually like talked about actually, like, you know, it's explicitly a point, and it felt like almost like shocking because it's like I'm not used to seeing it in literature, but then it's like, but it's almost like we want to forget it happened. But it's so very much part of our life, like we can't forget about those years, like, yeah.
And I thought, you know, both these books kind of very effectively examined imbalances in relationships and how, I mean, I don't know, how very easy it is to veer into obsession. You know, at least, I mean, both these books are from the point. I know we've read a lot of books where the men are obsessed with women, but this is the other way around, right? With specific, and especially in the case of Jakob, you know, where Mathilde, you know, falls for this student, and who she teaches, and then she's banished as a result, right? And there's an almost mythical punishing women aspect to that. And also what struck me was that later on he himself, though he was a willing participant, he changes it into sexual abuse, right? And which might or might not be true.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
So you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think that sums it up. And I as a writer of this novel, I didn't want to say this is how it is, or this is how she acts. This was a mistake, or this was not a mistake. This was his fault, or this was her fault. She makes the mistakes. That's undebatable. But he's sort of the aggressor in the relationship, but she is the one that is the aggressor in the sort of standard sense, as she
As
is
an adult.
Yeah, and his teacher.
Yes, and his teacher.
And but he is told that he's being a victim. He doesn't see himself as a victim in the start, but then somebody tells him that you are a victim. And what comes with being a victim? You bear no responsibility. And he is like, I have no responsibility for this. And he is over 18 years old. He is sort of an adult, a young adult. But he can not be responsible suddenly for any of his action because he is a victim. And then he feels like a victim, and I believe him when he feels like a victim in that. And I think that's interesting how he could sort of twist the roles and turn somebody into feeling something else, like traumatized, for example. But it's difficult balance writing about, because you have to sort of tread carefully, not to undermine the victim's feelings, because I don't do that. I'm just curious about the labels that we put people into, or the categories that are so defined, but they are not so black and white, right? The reality is far more complex than nuanced, and that's what I'm trying to show in the relationship between Matilda and Jakob, for example.
And I wondered at that point, you know, when the relationship is between a younger woman and an older man, you know, the difference in the perception, you know, and also who does the power lie with, you know?
Yeah, and I don't know. I think many of the readers would say that it lies with Matilda, but I think that's also because, as I said earlier today, also people are so angry with her as a female character with those traits. They find her deeply provocative, and I think also because she doesn't feel herself that she is provocative. She doesn't try to provoke, right? She just tries to find her way, and she tries to fill her voids in herself. And she does that by, of course, making mistakes, as we all do in life. But when she is making mistakes that men have done for years, she is punished so much harder, especially by female readers, and I think that's interesting.
And in the case of Leah in the water cure, and her, and how things change for her. It starts with in that I can't remember the name of the man.
So,
Yeah,
Liu,
you
yeah.
know, yeah. So that how it begins and how it ends, and it seems like a trajectory that's, it's like almost. It happens. We say that. So talk about that, and how it changes, and you've brought it out very subtly. How the whole thing goes from being an object of his desire to being, well, rejected. So.
Yeah. Well, talking about objects of desire, it was really important to me as well that he was very much like an object of desire for Leah as well, and that she had like that agency immediately. I like to paint like she was very much desiring him, and we're seeing him through her eyes, and desire is very new for her as well. Like she's never seen a man before and never really entertained, I guess, the possibility of this happening, and then suddenly he's there and she's beautiful and she wants him, and it's such a strange, discombobulating experience for her, but one that she doesn't know necessarily to like be wary of, or to kind of how to really approach it. Because I was just thinking, what would it feel like if you had your first crush, but you're a young adult, and the stakes are so much higher too, and she has kind of no comprehension. But I wanted to kind of transplant, I suppose, the relationship dynamic that we see all the time, and one that is like normal. Like you like someone, they like you, one person likes the other more, things fizzle out, we move on. But in the island, the stakes are that much higher. Like I said, it's not as simple as, okay, we hang out and then it fizzles out. It's very much like Leah has no way to deal with this like emotional kind of this thing, and so it becomes a larger thing than it is. But at the same time, there's a lot of joy in it, I think, at least at the start as well. There's that sense of feeling really understood and really cared for in the way that Leah hasn't felt before. But that kind of like ferocity of that first desire and wanting, and that fun they're having together, or maybe fun is not the right word, but that connection, it was really important for me to have that, I guess, that joy in that connection.
And I read some blurb which said that this is Lord of the Flies with women in it. Do you agree with that?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I love a Lord of the Flies comparison. I think I wanted to show how quickly things can fall away, and how quickly those social scripts and those dynamics that we're familiar with, how quickly they can be warped. Even in the family, the fact that the father is so controlling, that's not an unfamiliar dynamic to many families, but like in the water cure it is taken to the extreme, and so all the relationships are kind of taken to the extreme because they're all happening in this really tight microcosm, in this place where everyone is just so there's so few people, and it's so cut off from the outside world, and things can really develop in ways that are unexpected.
I was really interested in how you thought up this thing about those women coming into the island and going through all those whatever exercises, and they were made to do all these things, and and then there are some tragedies, like one person dies and one person falls off. How did you think of that? Because when I was reading it, of course it's because I'm looking at the structure and wondering how the author thought of this. Did it come from something you read, or what?
I'm not really sure. I think the idea of kind of people coming to the hotel and engaging in these therapies and trying to kind of be more well, that came to me, I think, from ideas of like sanatoriums, kind of like and hospitals and stuff in remote areas, and also like wellness culture too, Victorian water cures. I was talking a little bit earlier about that, but this kind of places that hysterical women were sent to kind of deal with their emotions, to undergo rituals and be purified and be like docile again. And actually I feel like something, Mathilde, no one really knows what to make of her emotions. She has this like ferocity in her that I felt like I very much connected to actually like while reading. But that sense, put to the town, she's dangerous, right? Like she is a woman who calls and rings and like doesn't act how they're expecting her to, and that is like a liability in that context.
Yeah, Mathilde, kind of, what struck me was how she was openly seductive, right? And that's what kind of irritates the women as well.
Yeah, but why?
Yeah, why? It made me think of that. Why?
Yeah, were you provoked?
I wasn't provoked. Well, yeah, actually I was.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, she's
Why?
like taking off her top and lying there and, arching her back. What is she doing? And she's going into this somebody else's husband's...
But you think
room.
she's
Yeah.
going after somebody's husband?
No,
because,
at first.
Yeah,
First.
exactly,
So I was
yeah.
like, what the hell is she doing?
Yeah.
This is not going to go down well.
No, but that's no, because it's not on you. Because that's how this is the discussions I have with the readers about this book. Because I mean that Matilda is obviously she is. I also find her, if not provoking, I find her annoying at times. I were very annoyed with her when I wrote her. But most of all, I think she. People say that she's hitting on somebody else's husband, but she is the single one. He's the married one, and she is getting all the blame, not just from his family or from the small village community, but also from the readers. Like you said, she's hitting on somebody else's husband. No, he is the one with the responsibility in that relation. And also she is sort of viewed as... I think it's interesting because I wonder what you would have thought about her if she was a male character that did the exact same thing. If you would have been as provoked with her then.
I would have been irritated.
You would be irritated,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, maybe not as much, I think.
Maybe not. Because, and then there's that point when she walks into that room, she leaves the women, and she goes into that room where he's watching TV or something and sits with him for an hour. And I'm thinking, I think she just has no idea of self-preservation also.
Yeah, I think maybe you're right, but I think most of all she doesn't... she isn't aware about the codes that we women all over the world is living by every day. She isn't aware because she doesn't care, and I think that was liberating to me writing her. But also it is important to say that of course Matilda is privileged that she can not care because she stands on the shoulder of women before her that have fought the battles that makes her that free, that she can do that. But also in the end I'm sort of confused myself because in the end she is punished for the exact same thing. Yeah.
And both these books, it actually made me really think about the codes. And I guess whoever decided to put both of you and all three of us together on this panel is to talk about the codes. And both these books make you conscious as a reader of the codes that you kind of like internalize. And then when I'm reading it, I'm saying, oh yeah, this is what. So you want to talk about that, Sophie? Or
Yeah, about the codes. Yeah, I suppose in the water cure, it's that idea of being an easy person, I think, is one of the things that really crops up. That sense of being a person who is like normal, not like there is no normal. In the sense in the book, Leah is so emotional, but not. I'm not using that in a bad way, but they're seeing it as a bad thing because her emotions are like a liability to the family unit. She can't be so kind of easily controlled. So it's that sense of wanting the girls to just really believe in the family structure and believe in the project of what they're doing, which is staying away from the rest of the world, not questioning. I think there's the codes of the family is really important as well in the water cure. The idea of like trusting the parents, trusting that everything is for their benefit, not like really daring to ask, or not even really thinking to ask, because, why would their parents lie to them? Why would they lie to them about a world that is toxic and dangerous? Like, of course they are keeping them safe. So I think, these kind of like these codes of like daughterhood and sisterhood, but also about, what it means to be someone docile and someone who doesn't question.
And also the being controlled by both the men and the women in your case, in your novel's case, were controlled by Johan, who's such a, I mean, he's fascinating, but he's horrible.
He's horrible. I agree. Is it a lot of horrible characters? Yeah, I love them.
And in your novel, King, I mean, he's really horrible too. So,
But I think in the case of Johannes, he is horrible. But I think the interesting question is, why is he horrible? Not why he perceived as horrible. Why is he feel the need to be as he is? And I think it's interesting how if we dissect every feeling, we tend to take our feelings seriously, right? So if we dissect every feeling, it has its own logic to why Johannes is sort of a misogynist and why he has this fear of women, because I think most of his horrible sides are actually fears. He feels threatened by women, and so he has to defend himself against them. And that's why he says, okay, women can't play the fiddle. Women can't even touch the fiddle, because if they touch the fiddle, it's doomed, or it has sort of, it won't, you can't play on it anymore. And I think most of what we perceive as people's horrible sides are mostly fears and protection.
So, but in this case, I mean, and he's also battering his wife, and nobody says anything. They all think it's like, they only remember great, nice things about him. Oh, he performs and he's so great, and all his stories. But the fact that he even tries to kill his wife, who doesn't say anything. I mean, what?
Yeah, because of it, in my when I wrote Johannes, I both believed he was secretly gay, and I believed that he was severely damaged emotionally. And I wanted to show that he, as an artist, that he was forgiven everything because of his art, because he was a brilliant musician. And I talked about that earlier today, so I won't repeat everything. But I find it interesting how art can sort of be that makes people forgive almost any behavior by artists. But also many artists has damaged sides and vulnerability to the world that hurts, and you have to have that sort of open window to the world, but then you are also open for attacks, and you have to guard yourself. And I think that's what Johannes is struggling with. So he's a complex character in my head and in my mind, but I do agree that he acts horribly, but he's not a horrible person.
But now that we've come to this thing about, artists, great artists, being also having this very dark side, and we know it. And now in the current world, I mean, with movements like Me Too, and we've recognized that. But how do people? I mean, you can't also just throw out art, right? Great art. So it's a very sad thing that we have to do. But what, did you think of that when you were like, No, meaning great artists. Can you just throw out, stop looking at their art or stop looking at their work? This idea just occurred to me just now to ask you this, because they are horrible people, and this is a question that we are constantly thinking about, right, with many people who are known offenders now, so Johannes fits into that category of men. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a dilemma, but I think that art in itself should be viewed separately from the artist. I do believe that. I do believe that you can see great art by horrible people and not support the horrible things that they do, but it can still be great art. I do believe that. I don't know
What do you think, Sophie?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a nuanced topic. It's hard to kind of, I think, separate sometimes, but I think the novel did like a really good job of kind of, I think, tackling that kind of aspect as well. And I think I like a novel where no one's all good and bad as well. Like, and I think it was that sense of I wasn't sure if I kind of forgave Johannes for like the kind of his acts, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, your novel has been translated into English, and when I was speaking to Sophie, we were talking about how, you're from Wales, and I was really fascinated about people talking Welsh still, and you do speak Welsh. So, is it in a country like India? I mean, we are multilingual. Everybody speaks at least 2 languages. So, how has that affected, your work? Do you think it has? Has that, apart from the names of characters?
Yes, that was hard to say. I think just in the sense of, like, I mean, I have lived out of Wales for about 15, 16 years now, but, for the first half of my life I was there and constantly switching between the two. And I think, like, unless you kind of have lived in Wales and some bits of Wales, like you were saying, like, oh, do people actually speak it? And it's like, yeah, it's like for some communities it's a really massive part of our daily life. I went to a fully Welsh school, for example, and I think that we have like a very strong poetic tradition as well in Wales, and the language itself is kind of beautiful and does really lend itself to rhythm. So I think rhythm is, as someone who started as a poet as well and someone who's grown up with Welsh, I think that sense of the rhythm of a sentence is really important to me. Having that kind of, I don't know, an instinctive sense of how it should sound because it's how I'm used to it, like sounding, and I guess like a knowledge of just like how nice, how a beautiful language can be, and a joy in playing with that. Like my school was just really great for encouraging kind of Welsh poetry, encouraging an interest in like Welsh literature, which at the time I didn't fully appreciate because I was more interested in English literature and feeling a bit annoyed and being like, no one speaks this language. But as I've kind of got older, I've had so much more appreciation for being part of that tradition and how it has like informed my own sense of like style and rhythm.
And did you work with the translator, or
Yes, it varies a bit because some translators are very independent and doesn't ask me a single question, which I am a bit afraid of sometimes, especially in this book, which are full of Norwegian phrases and references. But some translators are very curious about many of the things in the novel, so them I work closely with. But in the Norwegian version of wow, that's loud music. Yeah, in the Norwegian version of of Toxic, it's actually in Norway we have 2 written languages. Two. The one is called New Norwegian, and one is called Bokmål, and it's equal. 2 written languages. So the Nobel Prize winner, the literature Jon Fosse, he writes in New Norwegian, and it's 2 different written languages. And I use both of them in Toxic, in the Norwegian form, but it's non-translationable, so you can't translate it. But it's an important side of the novel in Norwegian, actually.
Oh. And it's intelligible? I mean, like a person speaking a New Norwegian?
Yeah, but it's not...
The script is the same?
Yeah, the script is the same. It's based on it's every other chapter is in New Norwegian.
Oh.
The character of Joss has a New Norwegian voice. And it's not dialect. And I think that's what most translator has asked me about, is that can we translate it into dialect? And I say, no, you can't, because dialect is associated with so much other things. New Norwegian is a written language solely. You can't speak it.
Oh, so that's lost in translation. In
It's
English.
lost in translation.
Okay.
Definitely, yeah. But that's okay.
Okay. So, but if you're a Norwegian and you're reading it, what do both these versions, when you're using both, what does it say to the reader?
I think it says it is the New Norwegian is mostly used in the rural parts, in districts of Norway, and it was one man that collected dialects from all over the country and put it together as a written language, and that's New Norwegian. Because we were in the union with Denmark, and we wanted to separate, because the language is so similar, so we wanted to separate the Norwegian language from the Danish language, and then he created this written language that was called New Norwegian, which actually is a collection of dialects from all over the country.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. So, and what about the myths? Did you know these myths, or did you put in some effort and
I did put in some effort, but because I didn't know them by heart. But I have a friend who is one of Norway's best, and she is a female, and she is one of the best Hardanger fiddle players in Norway. And she wrote an assignment about women in these myths that are tightly connected to the Hardanger fiddle plays. And I got a lot of free research from her, so we had a lot of discussions. So I must thank her, Sara. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so Sophie, in the Water Cure, there are all these things happening which are sort of like primal fears, at least that women have, like the fear of aging, the figure of the mother, and what happens to her. That's like the fear of aging and the fear of losing yourself in a relationship and becoming a nobody. That's another fear that women generally have. So, you want to talk about that? Did this all come to you kind of organically, or you worked it out in the novel?
I think it came to me fairly organically, but when it comes to writing, I'm very much a redrafter, and I'm kind of developing with each draft. So I think because of the dynamics of the family as well, and the way the dynamics are changing, especially I'm trying to say it without kind of spoilers, the relationship between Grace and Mother, for example. I think there is that sense of Mother is sort of the head of the household, and she is their mother, but also she's seeing the daughters as a threat. They are a threat to her way of life. They're a threat to her relationship with her own husband. Kind of getting that sense of the girls for the first time as not just daughters, but as people with their own agency, but also people who are younger than her, and beautiful, and almost having, like you said, that kind of primal reaction where suddenly she's I was sort of queen of the island, if you like. But I will age and I will die, and they will be here, and they won't be my daughters anymore. And I think it's always worth kind of examining where a fear comes from, and that sense of losing yourself in a relationship, that sense of being abandoned. And I think she also feels abandoned by the possibility of just this change and becoming irrelevant to the island, to her own life, I suppose.
And also Leah self-harming, which is what a lot of women do. Even that, it's it's something very primal, right? You turn the violence towards yourself.
Yeah, because there's a lot of kind of violence inflicted from externally, from the outside world, from the father, from her mother. It's sad to me that she is inflicting this violence upon herself, but it's all part of the kind of the rituals that they're doing to kind of in the context of the island. It's in the same family as the other rituals, the drowning game where they submerge themselves in water. A lot of the rituals around breath, around purity. In this sense, it's very much a kind of ritualized allowance of pain, a way for her to really make manageable the pain that she's feeling kind of on the inside.
Okay, is that the time for the questions? Okay. So great. So we'll throw open a thing to the audience. So if you want any questions, please ask. No questions? Okay.
Hi. Thank you. Oh, I just have stuff. That's what happened. Carrying around too many books now. So I was wondering about when you write fiction, feminist fiction, right? I've been especially reflecting about dystopian fiction, and we've had some tech billionaires recently demonstrate that they are extremely interested in sci-fi, but not ideally the way you would want them to be taking the lessons from. So I was wondering, how do you grapple with the anxiety that uh, when you write fiction, um, are you giving ideas to billionaires for a world that you don't want? I-
I feel like whatever they're doing is so much worse than what I could imagine. I like take no responsibility. I wish I could write something that they would do instead of like doing things that are way worse.
I think she means, you know, billionaires, tech billionaires. You mean Elon Musk, right? That sort of, yeah. You know, and their ideas of how women should be, and you know, we're moving towards a world which is not. Maybe the perception is that it's not very welcoming to women, right? With a return to traditional roles and all that. So that's what you're talking about, right?
I think I'll let her answer.
Right. Any more?
Hi, I'm just curious to know, like, when you write characters, there would be characters that you really love, like you very relatable, or you want to convey a particular thing. But you also create characters that you yourself may have found annoying while writing. So I'm just curious to know what is the process that you go through while creating these characters that annoy, that you may have found annoying, or what is this writing process that you actually go through?
Well, I think I get to know the character as I write them. I know some of their traits as I start. I know also what I want them to sort of represent in terms of the theme of the novel. But then I get to know them while I write them, and I don't think I can explain how I do that but it's that's sort of it's more it. I think I work similar to an actor actually. That it's role interpretation. That I go into role, and instead of acting out on a stage, I write it down, and every person I know will influence me and appear in my novels in a disguised form, because they are sort of put together by everything I observe everywhere, and I am deeply interested and fascinated by humans everywhere. So I think that's just how I do it. I observe and then I process it, and it turns out to be Matilda, who I love actually, but is also annoying. And she looks and appears as many of my friends and myself.
I also love Leah as a character, but find her annoying too. And I think a lot of the annoyance comes from care for the character, because you know you kind of you grow to love them, you spend time with them, and then I'm making her do decisions which are for the interest of the plot, but not for the interest of her. And I'm getting annoyed at kind of that sense of why are you reacting in this way. But I think that's part of the complexity of being alive, right? And that's how we make characters who feel alive to the reader. Like you want to sometimes be screaming at them and being like, why are you doing this? Like you want to, like, you can relate to that as well, right?
I think that should be it.
Yeah.
So thanks. We've had a great conversation, and I hope you guys enjoyed it too.